This is the pretty remarkable story of Tupac's family. The Shakurs were major players in the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s, and they have an absolutely wild background that includes everything from bank robberies to prison breaks to even murder. Tupac's mother was Afeni Shakur. She led the Harlem branch of the Black Panthers and was the most prominent member of the Panther 21, a group of 21 Black Panthers who were arrested in 1969 because they were supposedly plotting to bomb police stations and other buildings. This was a very high profile court case in the early 1970s, and the group was eventually found not guilty. Shortly after her release from prison, Afeni gave birth to her son Tupac. Her husband Lumumba Shakur was also a defendant in the Panther 21 bombing trial. After being found not guilty, he learned that he wasn't the father of Afeni's baby, and he left her and his newborn son Tupac. After Lumumba left, Afeni and Tupac moved in with Mutulu Shakur, who was Lumumba's adopted brother. Mutulu was a key member of the Black Liberation Army and was suspected of being involved in at least 9 bank robberies in the late 1970s. In 1982, Mutulu was accused of being the mastermind of a $1.6 million Brinks truck robbery that left 2 New York City policemen and the truck driver dead. He claimed he was innocent and went on the run when charges were filed for his arrest. He was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and he remained on the run from the FBI and in hiding for nearly 5 years. Tupac also had an uncle named Zayd Shakur, who was another very influential Black Panther. In 1973, Zayd was stopped by a state trooper on the New Jersey Turnpike and a shootout followed. Zayd was killed in the shootout along with state trooper Werner Forster. With Zayd on the night of the shootout was Assata Shakur, who was probably the most famous member of Tupac's family outside of Tupac himself. She was convicted in the killing of the trooper and sentenced to prison, and in 1979, she escaped and fled to Cuba. She was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and to this day she's living in Cuba under a grant of asylum. Before her arrest, she led the Black Panther chapter in Harlem and was dubbed the soul of the Black Liberation Army, and she's considered probably the most notorious radical figure of the 1970s. She had a list of crimes she was suspected of being involved with, including a hand grenade attack that destroyed a police car, the murder of a drug dealer, and multiple bank robberies. It's pretty wild to consider that this was the environment that Tupac grew up in. 2 family members were on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and both were on the run from authorities. Between the bank robberies and prison breaks and murders, there was so much crazy stuff going on, but probably the craziest thing was that the US government was basically waging a war against Black Panther leaders like the Shakurs at this time. COINTELPRO was an FBI program in which undercover agents infiltrated the Black Panthers to spy on members, frame them for arrests, and encourage members to become more violent. This was done to destroy the Panther movement and discredit them in the eyes of the public, and Tupac himself talked about this war on his family in many interviews.
The government raided every Panthers house, especially the ones who they felt like could do the most damage as an orator. So they just burst in and put a gun to my mother's head and said, "Don't move, you're under arrest." They treated them like less than human.
In fact, one of the reasons Afeni Shakur divorced her husband Lumumba was because they argued over whether a member of their local Panther branch was an undercover agent or not. It was later learned that his name was Ralph White, and he was an undercover NYPD police officer spying on the Panthers.
I work the I work my ass off. And I'm talking about I get results.
COINTELPRO often led to violence and death. Los Angeles Panthers leaders Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were killed by a group with ties to COINTELPRO. There were countless raids on Panther offices around the nation based on FBI tips, and many of these raids turned into shootouts. Probably the most famous victim of COINTELPRO was Fred Hampton, who led the Black Panthers in Chicago. Hampton was killed by the Chicago police during a raid on his apartment, a raid that had been performed on FBI orders led by Chicago police officers with ties to the FBI. We talked about the Fred Hampton case in our video on the plot to kill JFK in Chicago. Yes, JFK was nearly assassinated in Chicago 3 weeks before Dallas, and the Fred Hampton murder interweaves with this JFK assassination plot. This JFK Chicago assassination plot is such an incredible story, so definitely check out that video to learn more about this event that was almost one of the most significant events in the USA's history. Now, the FBI began this COINTELPRO program because J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI claimed many of these civil rights groups had been infiltrated by communists who were using the groups as fronts to create anarchy and destroy the United States from within. Hoover wrote that communists have been trained in deceit and secretly work towards the day when they hope to replace our American way of life with a communist dictatorship. They utilized cleverly camouflaged movements such as peace groups and civil rights groups to achieve their sinister purposes. You can believe that quote unquote stopping the spread of communism was the reason for COINTELPRO if you want to, but there are many who don't buy that explanation at all. And it should be noted that COINTEL didn't just target the Black Panthers. At the time, there were massive Vietnam War protests on college campuses, and COINTELPRO agents infiltrated those and destroyed these protests from within. The American Indian movement, which fought for the rights of indigenous tribes, was also targeted. The Ku Klux Klan was even infiltrated and spied upon. And there was also a massive group of Vietnam veterans who marched in the streets to protest the Vietnam War. This group, named the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, was also targeted for destruction by COINTELPRO. But the Black Panthers were the biggest and most powerful group targeted by COINTELPRO, and since Tupac's family was so influential and powerful in the Panther movement, they would have been one of the key COINTELPRO targets, which probably explains why nearly every member of his family was jailed, exiled, or outright murdered. The FBI claimed COINTELPRO ended in 1971, but no one, literally no one, buys that. The official program named COINTELPRO might have been terminated in 1971, but the government didn't just stop these activities. They don't call it COINTELPRO anymore, but the government continues to spy on citizens and monitor influential people and even attempt to destroy entire citizen movements.
Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. What? No! Peacefully. Fed.
Now, with Tupac's background and the influence he held, it's basically a certainty that he would have been monitored and targeted by a COINTELPRO type program. And this is a really fascinating angle to Tupac's death in 1996. Was the government involved with or behind his assassination? We won't get into that topic now, but we will come out with a part 2 that goes into much greater detail about COINTELPRO and how it could tie into Tupac's death. So be sure to subscribe and check that video out when we release it, and we'll see you very soon with another video.